Kenya. She's a child rights and anti-human trafficking specialist with immense experience as a result of working in various human rights organizations and a variety of consultancies. Ms. Gashanja works as the Child Rights Technical Advisor, NCAJ Special Task Force on Children Matters. One of the notable achievements of the task force has been the joint collaborations between stakeholders in the pursuit of justice for children, evidenced by the Children's Service Month undertaken in the courts of Kenya all over the country and the development of a new law for children in Kenya. She is equipping students currently with her knowledge and experience in human rights work at the Kabarak University, where she works as an assistant lecturer. She is also championing the work of Love Justice International, an international NGO that works on intercepting human trafficking through transit border monitoring. Madam Gashanza has also been the former, she just left, being the chair of the Advisory Committee on Counter-Trafficking in Persons in Kenya, which advises the Kenya government on matters to do with trafficking in persons. Please wave to the audience, Juliet. Great. The next one is Madeline Manza. She is currently the Kenya country manager with child rights organization Teredes Homes, Netherlands. She has served in the development and humanitarian sector for over 15 years in Kenya and Somalia. Her experience spans program development, partnership development, and capacity building, including program operations. She has a wide breadth of thematic expertise on issues of orphans and vulnerable children and child rights, refugee programming, commercial sexual exploitation of children, child trafficking, child labor, and sexual reproductive health rights. Magdalene is particularly passionate about child rights and child protection and is a strong believer of children empowerment and participation in addressing protection concerns of children. According to her, all children, no matter where they are from, have the right to grow up in a safe and violence-free environment at all times. She is a Kenyan and holds a Master's of Arts in Development Studies from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. Welcome. You can wave to the audience.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
We have Dida. Dida just joined us a couple of minutes ago. Dida is a graduate from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology with a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and Computer. He has over 10 years experience in humanitarian field, having previously worked with Government of Kenya, World Vision, and Save the Children. Dida is currently the Executive Director at Strategies for Northern Development from 2013 to present. Welcome on board, Dida. Unfortunately, he has muted his video, and we can't see him, Dida. Finally, we have Erastus. Erastus is currently the coordinator of Marked Kenya. He is an experienced facilitator and rapporteur and community organizer. He works prominently at the grassroots level, addressing these issues to do with child trafficking. He is skilled in social development related programming and has over 10 years experience developing and implementing community-based social strategies targeting vulnerable and marginalized populations. He is currently the coordinator of Marked Kenya, like I have indicated. I can see Dida is still trying to connect to the audio, but I believe that we'll be able to hear from him at some point. So we're going to have a great conversation here. We have great panelists, and I'm excited to hear what each one of them is doing, and also some of the things and the ideas and the thinkings and the emerging issues that pertains to things to do with trafficking in persons in general and child trafficking in particular. So I'll start with Dr. Durgana. You have done a lot of work on trafficking in persons at the global level. Let us hear about more of it, what you've been doing, and some of the challenges that first responders have been facing, according to your perspective.
Yes, thank you, Agri. So one of the most interesting aspects of our work has been our collaboration with the United Nations on the global estimates of modern slavery. So in 2017, this was the first time that we all agreed on one global number instead of having competing numbers that were out there that were really confusing policy priorities. However, one of the things that we found is that not all regions in the world experience modern slavery in the same way. And in fact, certain types of regions are affected worse than others. In fact, one of the studies that we're doing now is recognizing that it's very difficult to assess modern slavery in Arab states, mostly because there's tightly controlled data. It's very hard to access these countries, and it's very difficult to assess via normal surveys modern slavery when a lot of the people we'd want to talk to are actually migrant workers from Southeast Asia or from Africa. And so what we're doing now is a returned migrant survey, which means we are doing surveys in 11 countries known to send workers to Arab states for work and asking them about their working conditions while they were there. Of course, a lot of people don't make it out of those situations, unfortunately, but we are able to talk to many of them who have experienced this and have managed to return to estimate what we're missing in these Arab states. I raise this as an example of how really critical first responders are on the ground to data collection at a global policy level. The United Nations has a very big mandate to eradicate modern slavery within 20 years. I mean, we are looking to try to make a substantial difference, but this can't be done without local actors on the ground understanding why having data and information and collaborating in the research process is important. We need to be able to benchmark where we've been and to understand how effective some of these interventions are, so we know what to fund. We know how to advise all of these global policymakers. And that's not just governments. Those are also large private foundations, such as the one I work with, Mindaru Foundation, but also the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, the Omidyar groups. There are so many actors now in this space that we need to be really clear about what that looks like. Another aspect of our research that has been really interesting has been two sectors in particular that I wanted to highlight today, and that's cocoa and cobalt. Cobalt has been present in all smartphone applications. All of us using our phones and computers right now have cobalt in it, but we all know that that is sourced predominantly from the DRC and in specifically unregulated mines that are near enriched uranium fields, where young children are the ones who are able to access the cobalt and take it out. We're very concerned that a lot of the big tech companies that hold up specific sites, like the Mintoshi site, for example, in the DRC, as an example of ethical cobalt mining, actually do not uphold a lot of those principles. And in fact, our colleagues have submitted a class action lawsuit in London as of December to try to hold them to account. Similarly, we know the issue of cocoa in West Africa and specifically child labor in hazardous fields there. And one of the interesting things is we worked with a Dutch chocolate company, Tony's Chocolonis, to actually source their entire supply chain for chocolate. Now, of course, a company opens themselves up to a lot of scrutiny when they participate with us on something like this. But what's interesting is they've developed and pioneered a model where their baseline price for the producers pay for modern slavery, for this chocolate to be modern slavery free, is based on what it would cost to send a full family's children to school and to sustain food and housing. So basically looking at what does a dignified life look like? How do we make sure all the needs are met of our workers? And then pricing their chocolate on top of that. So it's an interesting example of the ways that we need to think very creatively. The last thing I wanted to mention in just this remark is about COVID. So, of course, we know COVID-19 has changed the world. What many suspected is that COVID-19's impact on tourism and commercial sex would actually limit the amount of people that were engaged in that crime. What we're seeing specifically in countries like Kenya, where there's already a robust child pornography industry, is that rather than street-based prostitution, children are actually being pushed just into online pornography, which has been, for us on the ground, in all countries, the United States included. Once a child is exploited online, it is significantly more difficult to identify, track, and take them out of that situation. And so particularly in Kenya, that's something that we're looking at very closely, is how do we track this transition from street-based prostitution, particularly of minors, to this online pornographic world where this exploitation can be perpetuated outside of physical spaces where we can access them. And we're working with a lot of our global tech partners to try to do better. But to be honest, we've been working on this in the United States for a very long time. And it is very difficult in the Philippines, in the United States, everywhere to identify where this exploitation is occurring. So it's something that deeply concerns me about COVID is that I think even if tourism and other sources of demand have dried up, that does not mean that the exploitation ends. In fact, it probably just transitions to another format.
So that is very great. And now, before we come back to you, Dr. Durgana, I want to go to Erastus. Erastus is one of those organizations that have been at the grassroots level, working directly with first responders. So probably I want to hear more from him, how they've been identifying these first-hand responders, what strategies have been using, and what are some of the challenges and success stories, Erastus, that you've had.
Thank you very much once again, Agre, for organizing such a global discourse to share the novel ideas. So I'm the coordinator for MARC, as was said before, and MARC stands for Movement Against Child Trafficking. It was formed in July 30th, 2013. So this is our 7th birthday. So happy birthday to MARC. We are glad we are doing this on this same day. So as first responders and the approach we are taking towards dealing with child trafficking, we've always been guided by the 5 Ps. of prevention, protection, policy, prosecution, and partnership. So we organize the communities in terms of we have actors that we've agreed and we organize them to rally them behind the fight against child trafficking and all other forms of abuse. So in the actors, we have the child who is the victim, we have families and communities, we have the government who really give us a lot of support, or rather we complement what government does, law enforcement, we have the private sector and the CSOs, which is our world. So what the approach we take from the grassroots, because mostly we are in the communities, is we do the prevention bit of it, So a lot of awareness and sensitization on ground, and we are devising strategies that can reach out to these areas we've highlighted as hotspot for trafficking and most of the abuse cases. So what the innovative strategies we've always employed are like we do stuff like the Miss Ghetto, the pageant, the beauty pageant. We also do youth-friendly services and child-friendly activities like sporting and that. So we had a kick out of Kenya soccer tournament. So we peg this with the messaging that is targeted towards the actors whom I just mentioned to rally support and curb these the problems we are encountering in the communities in terms of trafficking of children. About the challenges we have in the community, especially the major one is the security, because we've come to realize the racket about trafficking is very well organized across the world, and they are also very strategic. As we think on our side, they also think on countering and advancing their businesses. So the major problem we always have is security issues. Perpetrators, we may succeed in doing arrests and taking to court and prosecution successful, but they get bails. They come back to the communities because they are very powerful. And we've had issues of our officers being threatened where they live. We've had to move houses most of the time from where we are because of security issues. So it is a very serious concern. The other thing I would like to point out in terms of challenges is the resources. They are never very much enough for all these activities we do. So with the limited resources we have, we try to do the much we can, but at the end of the day, we realize there are some gaps. In terms of there's no full capacity in all the agencies and all the actors to fully execute and arrest cases. I think the other very major one I would like to point out at this point moving forward, as we still listen to other panelists, is the shelter. Especially now around COVID time. Government is not admitting. When we do rescues in the communities, we really have problems with where to put the victims. But now especially the boy child. The girl, we have a number of shelters within the partners who form the movement. But now there are no shelters for boys. It has been a big problem. So that is a key issue I wanted to. I don't know if I exhausted everything you asked, as we can. Yes.
We've been receiving some echo from you, but nevertheless, we had what you presented. So, Dida, welcome on board, Dida. We missed you when we were doing the introductions. So, I will ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, Dida, so that we can hear your voice. But most importantly, your organization, Strategies for Northern Development, has been working in a very unique environment at the eastern part of Kenya that borders Ethiopia, around Moyale area, and also Somalia at Mandera. And SND is one of those grassroots organizations that have been doing a lot in this regard. So probably you can also take us through some of the unique challenges that you've been going through as you work with first responders in that area, and also some of the success stories that you had. Dida.
Thank you so much, Agri, and thank you, team. Thank you, my panel. Thank you, panelists. Yes, just the way Agri rightly put it. My name is my names are Dida Ali Ibrahim. I work for strategies for northern development and local organization working in northern Kenya, and most recently also in southern Ethiopia. Sorry, I'm actually paying the price for coming from the periphery, and I'm sorry I had some network issues, and apologies for joining late. I have been trying actually. I was there from 3, trying to connect using. In fact, right now I'm using a computer of my colleague. Mine has refused to work, so apologies. That one said. Strategies for northern development works along the Kenya-Ethiopian border, and to some extent also the Somali border, because our operations, our operation area is Mandera and Moyale. Mandera, Kenya-Ethiopia border stretches over 860 kilometers. And a border that stretches over 860 kilometers has only one official border point, that is at Moyale. The rest are just porous. So you will, in terms of trafficking, in terms of people coming in, I think many of you will agree or you will understand some of the challenges that we go through. So basically, I want to start with some of the success stories that we have done. There are unique challenges as far as this border is concerned. I say the border stretches over 860 kilometers. There are only one official border point at Moyale. The rest are just for us. There are very few, if not none, of the security personnel. So in terms of the project that we are implementing just like MACT. We are actually a consortium partner with MACT. And we are supported. I have to acknowledge actually the presence of Tere Desoms. I'm actually seeing Madeline. We are being supported, or we are implementing a project with funding support from Tere Desoms, Netherlands. And the project is called the Building Fund Foundation for Child Trafficking Free Zones in urban and rural Kenya. That is targeting Nairobi, Busia, Mandera, and Marsabit counties. So the project is around 3 years old. Actually, this is the final year. And through this project, we were able to achieve, or we were able to do quite a number of things. For instance, at Moyale and Mandera border, we were able to rescue around 33 children for the last 3 years, the victims of child trafficking. And the other interventions that we do, we provide educational assistance to both victims and those who are vulnerable to child trafficking through provision of school fees, uniforms, and other essential services. We also do engage with media, where we create awareness on issues of trafficking or child trafficking. And we also provide seed capital to the families of the victims of child trafficking. So far, we were able to support around 25 families. We also train law enforcement officers, that is the police. We are coming from an area where, when you look at the literacy level, almost 90% of the communities are illiterate. So they don't understand what really encompasses trafficking or what really encompasses child trafficking and what is not. So we train both the local community and the law enforcement officers and arm them with the skills and knowledge on what the child trafficking is all about. We also work with teachers, where we also train them on child protection issues, child trafficking being one of it. We also ensure children participation through social events like formation of child rights clubs, supporting children assemblies, celebrations of the Day of African Child. Yes. And then we also work with the transport companies. We have buses, quite a number of buses flying Moyale, Nairobi, and Mandera, Nairobi routes. So we also work with these transport companies, and we enlighten them on dangers associated with child trafficking. In terms of challenges, there are unique challenges, quite a number of unique challenges as far as this border is concerned. One, victims of child trafficking or victims of human trafficking comes from the border areas. They come from southern Ethiopia, they come from Somalia regions. Unfortunately, in all these borders, there is no single framework or there is no cross-border child protection mechanisms. If it is the matter of security, there is intergovernment cross-border meetings and yes. If it is the peace building, if it is trade, there is cross-border coordination. But when it comes to the matter of child protection, when it comes to the matter of children, there are no single or there are no forum, there is no cross-border coordination mechanisms or platform which is in place. So that is one of the key challenges that we are experiencing. The other problem is our current project is Kenya-based or is a country-based. So when we have victim of child trafficking, and you report to the authorities, the first thing authority does is you will be arrested, or that victim will be arrested because he's not a Kenyan. He went or he came into Kenya illegally. He's not a recognized refugee. Even providing essential services and support is very difficult. Then along the border where we work, there is no single risk centers. That is also another biggest challenges. You risk a child, you end up hosting that child. There is no place you can take. There are no risk centers. So you have to either host that child yourself or look for a caregiver to host that particular child. Another unique challenges that we are facing as far as the Kenya-Ethiopia border or the areas that we work is concerned is the culture. We have the maslaha system where community prefers the maslaha. The maslaha is the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, which is localized, you know. So you will see communities have giving preference to traditional maslaha system or traditional alternative dispute resolution mechanism at the expense of, you know, the justice for the victim of the trafficking. Finally, I know I've taken a lot. Finally, corruption is also another challenge or unique challenges that we are facing. There is collusion between government officers, immigration officials, the police officers, the chiefs, with the traffickers, with the syndicates or who works around the trafficking to forge some documents and in the end allow people to cross to the Kenyan side. So those are some of the few challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. The advisory committee on contact trafficking in Kenya, and you are also one of the leading legal experts on child trafficking. What has been the gains so far in Kenya in terms of taming trafficking persons and some of the unique challenges when you are working as the as the chair of the advisory committee and also currently as the legal expert on this matter?
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Agre. And it's been wonderful to actually hear from all of us. I am definitely looking forward to just picking up a few things. So I hope I'm audible and that you can hear me well and that there's no static in my in my speech. But just to sort of draw your attention to what has been happening. First of all, when I became the chairperson of the advisory committee, this was the first time that Kenya was starting to implement the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Act, our law having been passed in 2010, gazetted in 2012, and then now we formed the advisory committee, which is the body that was supposed to, that is actually mandated to implement the said law. And so obviously when I began, there was very little conversation on the table about human trafficking. In fact, I remember it used to be about 5 people, 10 people. I'm happy that some of the panelists here actually formed part of that table. And so that is one of the things I can say that the gains that we have made as a country towards combating trafficking, that we have extended our expertise to address this issue in different facets. But most importantly, the use of our Counter-Trafficking in Persons Act, I can say for sure that as a lawyer, I have seen great improvement and and use of the Trafficking in Persons Act. I know a lot of people will say, no, we have very few prosecutions or we have very few convictions from the Trafficking in Persons Act. But just by the fact that we can now have a case in court under the Trafficking in Persons Act using Section 3 or Section 4 of the same law, I think is quite an advancement. Another gain that we've made as a country is at the time when right now we have a new advisory committee. And when we began, we didn't have much policy, we didn't have much guidelines on the issue of counter-trafficking in persons. But I can say that we now have the national referral mechanism. The question is whether it is being properly utilized. We also have various documents that we are actually working towards, and of course have the National Plan of Action, which is currently under revision. So those are some of the gains that I can say for sure that I have seen in this country when it comes to combating human trafficking. Something else that is very, very important, especially with today's discussion, concerning victims and how we deal with our victims. And I can say that when I first heard of a case of human trafficking in Kenya, and when I was invited to help the police work on it, there are very many questions as to what are we looking at? Is this really a case of why are you calling it human trafficking in the first place? In fact, it was a case of child trafficking for purposes of labor. And I remember the police officer saying to us, beyond labor issues, beyond the fact that this child was roughed up by her employer, what else are we looking at? And I had to explain to her what human trafficking was, what the Trafficking in Persons Act was saying, particularly concerning this kind of a matter. And I remember at the time when we did the rescue, we didn't know where to place this child. We, in fact, because we rescued one child who was a victim and another child who was the child of the perpetrator. And we didn't know where to take these children. But with time, what has happened is, and this was a few years back, but with time, what has happened is even the NGOs and the support system within the country is starting to understand trafficking. And so therefore, they are putting in place measures to ensure that their systems or their structures can help victims of human trafficking. And another important gain is the establishment of the National Assistance Trust Fund for Victims of Trafficking. When I was some years before, I was working for an organization called the Cradle the Children Foundation. And one of the mischievous things that we did, I say mischievous because someone said, we didn't have to talk through the court, but the use of public interest litigation case to be able to establish the National Assistance Trust Fund for Victims of Trafficking. Because this didn't exist. It is provided for within the law. The law is very clear. Our Trafficking in Persons Act, Section 15, is one of the most brilliantly drafted sections of that law because it gives extensive protections on the victims. However, that section had never been implemented, and we were really having trouble. How do we protect victims? How do we support victims so that we reduce their chances of being re-trafficked? And so we went to court, and our case played a great role in ensuring that the establishment of this National Assistance Trust Fund. But beyond just the establishment of the fund, there was also need to put money within that fund. And I can say so far, and I actually had it today from the discussions that were going on in the country, that indeed there is money now to support victims of trafficking. So we have a board, and then we have the fund, and that fund is actually being used to support victims of trafficking. But you've also asked me, what are some of those challenges that we are facing with especially what I'm doing now? So currently what I do is I support various institutions through training, and just helping them figure out their programs, understand where their gaps are at within the country, and also work closely with the advisory committee here and there to support the things like to do with the National Plan of Action, their regulations, etc. So one of the things I am currently working on, and I'm proud to say this, is the Love Justice International organization, which works towards intercepting human trafficking. And why is this important? it's important because the work that Love Justice does, which is really work that can be done by just about anybody in this forum, by the government itself, is preventing human trafficking. If you look at the National Plan of Action of Kenya, the one that has expired, it did talk about, we costed it. And there's a lot of cost that is on protection and prosecution. However, if you look at prevention, the cost on prevention was actually very low. But the truth of the matter is that if we actually prevent trafficking from happening, we will not need to use so much money to repatriate, rehabilitate victims of trafficking. And so what Love Justice is actually doing is monitoring persons who would be at a very high risk of being trafficked, giving them the necessary information, sometimes stopping them completely from traveling and saying, hey, do you want to consider your decision about wherever it is that you're going? So Love Justice, we have our frontline workers are what we call monitors. And we have our monitors working within the border areas, within bus stations, within markets. So areas that you would say are high-risk areas for cases of trafficking. And this is a sure way of, first of all, identifying the kind of would-be victims of trafficking, identifying the trends of trafficking, and also putting a stop to trafficking in itself, so intercepting human trafficking. And I think it is necessary that as a country, as we are moving forward, and not just even Kenya, even as a region, even across the globe, this is something that can actually be done. If we are able to identify what are some of those red flags of human trafficking, when you see people traveling, when you see them in a bus, when you see them in the plane, when you meet someone in the supermarket, what are some of those red flags? And then how do we, what do we do to support that person so they're not re-trafficked? So what are some of those challenges? And I'm happy that this panel is, we are vast, but because we are those, some of us make those frontline workers. And sometimes we'll say that the police are the frontline workers, the medical personnel are the frontline workers. And sometimes we forget and remove ourselves from this equation. So for me, I want to say that our frontline workers as Love Justice International are our monitors. And the truth of the matter is, their lives most of the time are at risk because they work in very, high movement areas. And of course, even from what you have seen from our own data, is that you have victims of trafficking traveling with their traffickers. So they'll have someone either closely by or actually walking with them and saying, when you stop them and ask them, where are you going? They'll say, this is my husband, or this is my wife, and this is where we are going, or this is my daughter, or this is my son, and this is where we are going. So the minute that our monitor has to put a stop to someone's travel, automatically the mind of the trafficker goes like, I need to get rid of this person. So there is the issue of course, security for our personnel, and now imagine even for the police and anybody who works on human trafficking issues. Of course, like everybody else has said, there's the issue of rescue shelters. Luckily, because Love Justice works in partnership with various organizations in Kenya, we also work with Trace Kenya, and we work with the Salvation Army Church. Because of that, then we are able to use the little funding that we have towards intercepting, and then we get support from various other organizations. So the issue of rescue and rescue shelters and rescue places, and even just a place for someone to put their head as we are figuring out the following day, do we pursue, if we are able to arrest the perpetrator, do we pursue a criminal case, or do we send you back home, is a big problem. And actually it's actually a very high in cost. And then the other issue, of course, is just funding. My worry always is when I send you back home, when I say, maybe you shouldn't travel, maybe you shouldn't go to the Middle East, maybe you shouldn't come to Nairobi, maybe you shouldn't go to Uganda or Tanzania. When you go back home, what are you going back to do? The push factor was already in your environment. So when I say go back, what are you really going back to? Are you going to be trafficked? Is there a possibility of being trafficked? So those are some of the things that I worry and I fear about when it comes to the challenges that we face in combating human trafficking. I hope I've done justice to your question, but I'm still here.
You did very well, Juliet. So Terra des Homes Netherlands has been in the forefront working with partners and sometimes directly in Kenya and other parts of the world. So probably this is now the time for us to hear Magdalene's voice and also what kind of things have you been doing about these issues in Kenya? Probably.
Yeah, thank you very much, Agre, and my fellow panelists for that question. And also, I'm happy to be in this session. As you've heard, I work for Teredes Homes Netherlands, and this is a Dutch child rights organization, which is actually whose mandate is to end child exploitation. And globally, we focus on 4 themes. One of them being child trafficking. And this is of interest for this particular discussion. The other 3 are child commercial sexual exploitation of children, child labor, more focusing on the worst forms of child labor, and child abuse, looking at the traditional practices, especially FGM, child marriage, and the like. Also looking at issues of sexual reproductive health rights. So when it comes to child trafficking, Teredes Homes is keen on also the 5 Ps that have been mentioned, I think, by our partners. They have already mentioned that we work together. And our first approach is to prevent child trafficking from happening, and that involves creating awareness, building also the capacity of the stakeholders that we are working with in the communities, ensuring that really people are aware of the dangers and the impacts of trafficking on our children, and that they are able to do their best to see how they can prevent this from happening. And the other aspect we also do is on the provision, because we all know that in the child protection arena, as much as we are doing a lot of things to ensure abuse, exploitation, violence does not happen, then we are getting all these cases. And it's a worrying. I think a child human trafficking in person is a global issue that is even threatening the attainment of the sustainable development goals, and it's a problem worldwide. And for Kenya, we've just heard from our partners what the vice is presenting itself like, and the challenges we are facing. So as TDH, we call TDH Netherlands, we work through partners. Actually, partnership is our DNA as an organization, and we believe that through partnership, collaboration, coordination, we are able to tackle child trafficking in a more sustainable way. And when I say partnership, we also keen on our participation of children, which is very key in all efforts to address children issues and child rights violation. And I've heard also partners mentioning how we engage children and youth in terms of also creating awareness and also having kind of agencies within children and youth to ensure also they can really be able to detect or even support each other in terms of also identifying possible or potential risks of child trafficking, and also being able also to engage with child bearers to really voice their issues or their concerns and see if their rights are addressed adequately. So we have been working in Kenya since I think over how many years now? Since 1968, and we've really gone through so many phases when we are looking at child trafficking, and I just have had also the steps and the milestones that the government has made in Kenya. We really also appreciate the efforts, and so far what has been achieved in terms of putting together frameworks to really address child trafficking. Recently now we have the national referral mechanism, which was not there. And this is all because of collaborative efforts by different actors. As well as now the counter trafficking in persons secretariat, which is also there is the multidisciplinary angle into tackling this vice, which is actually a threat in the country. we are also pretty aware of the negative social norms, because we've had cases of communities who don't even see it as an issue. And for them to send their children, for example, in the coastal region, to get hooked up to a tourist who is also looking for some entertainments and all that is not a big issue. So we really also digging deeper, working with partners, communities to see how do we really influence for change on some of these negative social norms that are really contributing to child trafficking. And how do we ensure our communities, yes, they also have positive norms, how do we ensure that they really adopt those to ensure really children are protected from child trafficking? One thing I think now it's a threat and presenting to all of us globally is the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, which has also some significant impact on children. And we all know that it's now amplifying the dangers of child trafficking and other exploitation of children. I think around May we had that there's a spike in the number of cases of child exploitation. And we've also heard that as much as this COVID-19 pandemic is also creating a different or difficulty situation for us, we all know that the perpetrators of child trafficking and trafficking in persons are also devising new ways in how they are going to counter the efforts that are being made by, and therefore we are also pretty aware and also looking into how do we ensure, we are talking about the frontline first responders to child trafficking who are now the monitors on ground. How do we also ensure that they are equipped with the skills to be also able to go beyond, and also to be aware of also these other new models and ways the perpetrators could be putting in place. And just into some of the challenges that have been already raised by or even shared by the panelists. Yes, we are talking about first responders, but really we also are struggling with capacity issues. And how do we also ensure that every person who is supporting in the detection, the response, the reporting, the prosecution also has the right capacity, way from now the police, the immigration, the border officers, the prosecutors, in terms of getting the right, equipped with the right skills and capacity, and being able that to ensure that they provide services and also prosecute these perpetrators. So these are some of the things. Online interactions increasing. I think we all know that with schools closure, the restrictive movements presented by COVID-19, people are also not able to have the social engagement they had before, and therefore they are finding more opportunities going online, and this is really a risk, as much as we also know it is coming with only advantages, but also a risk to children, because a good number are out there online, probably e-learning, and without proper supervision and monitoring by their caregivers, who a good number do not even know about the risk and dangers that the internet can present. So this is also something as an organization with our partners we are really focusing on, even around this, to ensure that children are aware, caregivers are aware about online child safety, and also being able to report any cases that we come across through the partners and also the government actors who are looking into this. So basically, those are some of the things we are doing as TDH, and we really appreciate actually the effort from all stakeholders, partners, the government. Truly, we can see there is a lot of progress if you look back from where we have come from. Thank you very much. I think that's in a nutshell what I can share.
I want to go back to Dr. Durgana to talk about the Global Slavery Index. But before that, I want to remind the audience, I can see so many people are making chats on the chat section of our webinar. Probably if you have a specific question, please put it under the Q&A session so that we can keep track of the questions as they come. Dr. Durgana, you've been one of the co-authors of the Global Slavery Index. that has been quoted by so many people about the situation of trafficking in persons globally. So please tell us more about the index and the general overview of modern slavery globally.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's been, everything that you're sharing today are things that we're really deeply looking into. We anticipate a report coming out in October that actually focuses on women and girls, because our global estimates found that 70% of the respondents that we identified were actually women and girls. And we know that there are so many cultural practices. I know my fellow panelists have mentioned FGM and other repressive patriarchal issues that are eliminating free choice and opportunity for women, particularly in education. In particular, one of our participants asked some really great questions about what kind of progress has been made globally in the last 20 years since we've been really looking at modern slavery as an international community in the United States and globally. And some of the things that I would say is that I've seen personally, and I know my colleagues can probably share this, but there has been an explosion of interest in this field. I can remember working on modern slavery back in 2006 to 2008, and people didn't really know what this was. There was not really an understanding. You were kind of defining it. There was this perception that it was only Eastern European women trafficked for sex. There was no understanding really of forced labor. Commercial sexual exploitation of children was very much the focus. But even by virtue of the discussions we're having today, we can see that a lot of progress has been made in terms of awareness, in terms of legislation practices, which I'm so excited to hear Juliet speak about, because truly legislation is the cornerstone and the foundational part of how we can respond as first responders. Without these legal mandates, it's very difficult. Without this definition, without calling it slavery, it is very difficult to make a distinction between exploited labor and modern slavery. And, in very many industries, you have very vulnerable people that will always be in an exploited position. We're doing a lot of work on slavery at sea. So those are fishers that are in deep sea waters who have been exploited for generations in unethical work practices and working conditions, but it is modern slavery. And so by defining it as such, it gives us a lot of policy tools that just didn't exist before. One of our participant colleagues had asked a few questions about specifically to that end, what have some of these countries been doing? And especially the examples I raised earlier about cocoa and cobalt. Then I have good news on cocoa and less good news on cobalt. So globally, there's been a lot of pressure on cocoa, specifically on supply chain transparency, which is another huge transition that's only come around in our field in about the last 5 or so years, where you're seeing huge multinational companies really hold accountable for this. We're having discussions as stakeholders. So you're not even just talking about people with their corporate social responsibility. They're actually investigating the economic cost of not upholding human rights in your supply chain. I mean, that's an amazing transition from when we used to assume that the cheaper the labor, the better the product, right? Or the better the market for the product. Specifically, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana have both done quite a bit with respect to cocoa. They've identified that those are the high-risk industries that they've become kind of known for in this global space, and they've signed on to something called the Harkin-Engel Protocol and the Associated International Cocoa Initiative, which is a voluntary initiative that started in 2001 that tries to eradicate child labor in cocoa production. More specifically, though, Ghana has gone beyond that. So in addition to their national legislation, they've also improved efforts to protect victims by finalizing and beginning to implement standard guidelines for identifying and screening victims. And this is critical for our first responders. Without guidelines, without training, it's very difficult for people to prosecute crimes as trafficking, to identify victims as such when they're encountered. So this is a huge step. Also, Ghana is one of the few countries in the region that recently that sufficiently funded their national action plan. So many national legislations require a national action plan for the federal government to enact these changes. But Ghana is one of the very few, along with Senegal, Algeria, Mali, and Malawi, that have actually funded that plan. So it means that all the things that they hope to do, they actually have the ability to do. Now, the less good news on cobalt is that the DRC, of course, has been plagued by conflict, and that has really inhibited their ability to respond to this the way that you can imagine that they would like to had they not had civil conflict and lots of other issues in confluence. Of course, there are many other issues in addition to cobalt mining in the DRC. We've got still children in armed conflict. And we've also got some extractive industries, such as diamonds and gold mining in the DRC and in neighboring Angola, where there's significant amounts of child labor, forced labor, torture, murder, forced displacement. Like, these are huge issues. I have to say that this is one case where Dr. Latanga has raised this question, and this is one case where regional and national bodies may not be enough to actually affect the type of change we want. This demand for cobalt is being fueled by the largest and most powerful technology companies in the world. Because of that, this type of change really has to come from the top down. So part of that is that stakeholders are asking questions, and then certain groups are putting forward examples of model mining sites. However, I mentioned before, there's a class action lawsuit filed by one of my colleagues at Harvard, Siddharth Kara, on how those sites are actually fraudulent. They don't exist the way that they are. Children are not in school. They do not get these provisions. In fact, they are still just mining like everyone else. And there's no way to accurately say that this mining material is just coming from that site and ethically produced. So I do think that to a certain extent, we need to put a lot of responsibility on governments. But I think also in the context of supply chains, these multinational companies have a significant differential of power. They have the ability to kind of prevent a lot of this exploitation, and they know very well what's going on. So what I would say is that globally what we're seeing is that supply chain transparency and engagement could be a really huge mitigating factor in some of these very exploitative industries. And that's actually something we're focusing on at the Global Slavery Index. We're looking at goods that are imported that are suspected to be made with child and forced labor, such as gold from the DRC. And we're looking at, actually, I work with the US government, Customs and Border Patrol. They have a withhold release order that we implement when we know that goods are likely to be made with child and forced labor. We can actually prevent them from being imported into our country. We've recently done that, of course, with the North Koreans and their goods, and especially any products that are suspected to be made with through the exploitation of the Uyghur population. So I think that there's a lot we can do, but I also wouldn't leave it just to some of these countries alone, because I think there's very little they can do in face of such powerful demand for these goods.
So, Dr. Durgana, you are one of, just to be mentioned, you are one of those who've been leading in terms of capturing data globally. Mm-hmm. And one of the challenges that I know other panelists probably will concur with me has been the issue of capturing data, getting reports mm-hmm. and actual victims. Most of the time they are estimates. So Can you please tell our audience, why is it so? What is the challenge of getting data, and what do you think needs to be done with partners like the ones you're talking to right now?
Yes, thank you. So actually, I can speak to you in two different hats here. My first hat is as an author on the Global Slavery Index, where we work with countries and civil society groups all around the world, just like everyone on my esteemed panel, to try to understand the kinds of trafficking they're experiencing. Because I always say, if you can't count something, we can't prove to the policymakers that are sitting in their offices and their houses of parliament that this is something that is worth their attention. The evocative stories are very important, and those are narratively important. But when they're dedicating funding, they generally want to know, who is this affecting? And part of that who is how many people are affected. One of the things that is really challenging about this, of course, is that many victims do not identify as victims. Naturally, they've been in situations of exploited labor or harm for a very long time. We see that with South Asian workers who often go to the Middle East, the UAE, to perform work, and their passports are taken. They're made to live like 10 to 12 people in a room. They're not given adequate food, protection, all of this, but it's intergenerational harm, because in their perception of this work environment, they think it's better than what I would be doing back home in Nepal or Bangladesh or India. And this is how my fathers worked, my grandfathers worked. Like, this is normalized by this kind of cultural practice, which gets to another one of Dr. Latanga's questions about Mauritania specifically, and what we do when there are entrenched social inequitable policies. I think also what we're talking about is, how do we not just help victims to identify what we would consider from a Western bias, and of course it is a very Western bias. A lot of these survey groups, a lot of these UN agencies are based in the West. And so I think there is a bit of a cultural challenge in terms of what we call cognitive testing when we develop the surveys, to ensure that people can understand the questions that we're asking in the way that it's intended. So I think there's a lot of cultural challenge in terms of identifying victims correctly through survey research. The other problem, of course, is that survey research is typically predicated on administrative data. So if you are not a population that's captured in a national census, for example, we may not be sampling enough of your population. Those are migrant workers, those are people in militaries, those are people that are in prisons. And so I think we can definitely see that there are huge gaps to measurement that could only be filled by first responders on the ground. Additionally, what I would say is that when we're talking about estimation and evidence, one of the greatest things that we've uncovered is that this lack of identification of male victims came across because we were identifying so many female victims. But we knew that there were so many industries that were male focused, fishing at sea, mining, a lot of these industries that are really male focused, but we're not seeing the same types of response rates. And so that's actually prompted us to change our engagement. So instead of only talking about female victims, we're now talking about the types of trafficking that are occurring to all types of demographics. And I take that point from Marissa's comments about boy child. I mean, that's something we face in the United States as well. In fact, there are so few available shelter beds for boys that they're often put in homeless shelters, which are not appropriate for victims of crime. And that's in the United States, where there's dedicated funding for a lot of this, like more dedicated funding than you could hope for. So it is the way we perceive the victim based on the data has a huge impact in how our engagement and outreach strategies and how our projects are funded. So it's all of it is tied together. I think it's really difficult. So that's my Global Slavery Index hat. As Vice Chair of Statistics Without Borders, one thing I want to invite to you is that we perform pro bono statistical assistance to any group in the world, any NGO in the world. So if you're a group on this call or any of my panelists that have any data needs, you can contact me and we will help you for free with many, many very skilled statisticians who just volunteer and do this for their own time. So we've done other projects in the anti-slavery field, but we've also done projects on cheetah conservation and different things. But the point is, statistics has become so important in the policy and decision-making process that we want to equalize who has access to those types of skills and analyses. And that's why Statistics Without Borders is committed to providing that service for free to any NGO. So all of that to say that we recognize there's a huge disparity in terms of the very limited funding many groups on the ground have, and then this mandate to try to measure and improve estimation systems. Like, we recognize that's too much to ask almost, which is why I'm very grateful to also be involved in a group like Statistics Without Borders, where we can provide that for free.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dilgano, for that pro bono offer. I believe that guys in the audience and even us will take advantage of that. So I want to bring to our attention the model that most actors usually employ, the 5 Ps model, which is prevention, protection, policy, prosecution, and partnership. And I know many of our colleagues within this sector of anti-trafficking in persons have been talking about this since the month started. So probably, Juliet, I want to come back to you because you've been into this and you've also been taking care of these things at a national level. So from your own view, which P do you think has been given less attention, and probably why? And probably you can also tell us the P about prosecution, because that is your area as a legal expert.
All right. First of all, let me just, I agree with what Dr. Davina has actually talked about data, and I'm really happy for the, for the offer to to use your pro bono services to just be able to collect data. I mean, it's a real problem, and as a lobbyist. And first of all, as a lawyer, I ran away from statistics. I mean, I try as much. But then as a lobbyist, I've continuously come to learn the importance of having strategies and interventions that are actually data and research informed. And so therefore, I mean, I think it's really, really necessary. And one of the things, before I again answer your question on the 4 or 5 Ps, is that as lab justice, we actually really do use this data, and we have used technological advancements so that we can be able to sort of harness information like trends of trafficking, like areas where the traffickers are coming from, or where the victims of trafficking are actually coming from through this data, and it has really, really been helpful. So I think it's a necessary push to go towards that direction, where we actually starting to use data to help us inform policy and to also help us to inform intervention. So now the question that you've asked, which is really difficult, which P has received the least attention? Quite honestly, I think. From a standpoint of Kenya, I can say that it depends also with the counties. This is because all this how much attention or what we do within the Ps, whether it's prevention, prosecution, or protection, because that is where we all began before we brought on partnership and the other Ps. is really dependent on our understanding of what human trafficking is. So when Kenya began addressing human trafficking, we realized that we were a little bit late. So we had quite a huge number of people who were being trafficked. So we kind of had to play catch up, where you're trying to address the issue of repatriation and rehabilitation of some victims. You're trying to create policies and regulations that are going to support this particular issue. And on the other hand, you're also trying to prosecute, trying to use this new law. And so if you look at our NPA, the first NPA that was costed, as I said, a lot of the funding looked like it was going to protection. Because at that particular point, we really hadn't done much towards preventing human trafficking in the first place. So that's why I'm saying all this is really dependent on our understanding on human trafficking and where we are at as a county. But generally, I can say this, that whereas prosecution carries on and they do their job because already, you already have prosecutors. So it's a matter of them taking on using the Country Trafficking in Persons Act to actually prosecute cases. You realize that there is a little bit less funding that is being put into building capacity for our law enforcement, investigators, prosecutors, so that they can be able to understand the issue of trafficking. And not just human trafficking. I mean, it's transnational organized crime, because all these are connected. And training is an expensive aspect of this whole thing. So yes, we might get it right at the prevention point. We can get it right at protection, but then we also must be able to put away the bad guys. This is just the truth. And as Dida said, there is the issue of corruption, which is why we are not having as many cases, for instance, translate into. A lot of the cases referred are not translating into prosecution. There's the issue of capacity. That is just the understanding of the Country Trafficking in Persons Act. There is also the issue of capacity of, for instance, how do we get evidence out of the victims of trafficking? How do we convince the victims of trafficking? The other P, I think, so prosecution is one of those P's that I feel like we could do a little bit more as a country, because I've also seen a lot of our work, whether it's NGO or government, are highly focused on creating awareness. And so creating awareness, whether it's working through the community, whether it is, just creating awareness through radio, creating awareness through, as Erastus has said, the various angles that they bring on. So there's a lot of focus on prevention. But then now we have a victim. And let me talk a little bit about child trafficking. Under the UNCRC, all states have an obligation to make sure that they protect children from all forms of violence. And they're supposed to also take measures to ensure that they support victims. So when you have a victim of trafficking, we are supposed as a country to ensure, one, that this person receives, is treated so that they actually leave this victimhood. And then after that, we are supposed to rehabilitate them. And if they have moved away from their home, which is what really happens with trafficking, we are supposed to repatriate them and ensure that wherever we are repatriating them, they are safe and secure. And ensuring that these people and these children, and whether it's adults, that they are not falling through the cracks. So the other P that to say is that protection it's expensive, but it's also not receiving as much attention. So we will say we've done well by repatriating. We've done well by rescuing. And then what? I have been in instances where we are planning a rescue mission. So you'll go in and rescue, and then everybody backs out when it comes to the next steps. So as a country, as NGOs, as partners, as donors, I think it is really, really necessary that we actually address the issue of protection. Policies are great. And I'll say from the point of view of a lawyer, policies are amazing. And we have them in Kenya. The Country Trafficking in Persons Act is one of them. And we don't just need to use the Country Trafficking in Persons Act. There is the Employment Act, which you can actually use if someone is in forced labor or child labor. We have the Sexual Offences Act, where if you're not able to prove the case of trafficking, the act, the means, and the purpose, you can actually, if there's a case of sexual exploitation, the Sexual Offences Act is more than enough to prosecute cases of sexual offenses. So we have enough policies. Now we need to move to the next step, where we are saying I'm happy that Davina has mentioned that Ghana and Malawi are actually funding their NPAs, because it's time to move from where we are saying we have a policy or we have a law to now saying we're going to put money where that policy is. As I said, I pointed out Section 15 of the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Act. It is brilliant. If we are to just implement at least a half of it, I think we'll be able to really help victims of trafficking, and we should be able to end the scourge. Because one of the things we need to remember is that there's this push factors. Why people keep being trafficked is because of the push factor. Like, forget about the pull for a minute, but the push factor really plays a great role here. And one of the things is, change in lifestyle, poverty, where you're forced to move out, for instance, of where you are, or what you know as your safe and secure location. So if we are able to address those things, and those are particularly addressed under Section 15, which talks about victim protection. So ensuring that the victim is well cushioned, so to speak, if I can use that word. They're well cushioned so they do not fall victims again. And before they become victims, we have to ensure that we take care of them so they don't become victims in the first place. So what I'm talking about is social protection and social assistance mechanisms. Have I done well? I know I haven't, I've left a little bit on prosecution, but I think I can come back and talk about it. Yeah.
No problem. So one of the pieces that you talked about, Juliet, is partnership, that you said we need to put a lot of focus. And I'm glad that we have Madeline, whose organization, Terrorist Homes Netherlands, have been in the forefront trying to bring partners together and sometimes supporting them both financially and technically. Magdalene, I want you to answer this question in terms of what are your views of involvement of the private sector in partnership? Are they felt? Where are we running short in terms of engaging them? But as you answer that question, I want to also go to the Q&A part so that you can also dispense with the two questions. One was asked by Karen Kawira, who says, beyond the rescue measures for human trafficking victims, are there follow-up measures to the victims, or does it really end at the rescue mission? Then Dennis has also said that what is the situation with regard to cross-border and internal trafficking of children with disabilities? To you, Madeline.
Thank you very much, Agri. And so when I was just sharing what we focus, I think the 5 Ps are coming pretty across all of the interventions. We also mapped out our actors, the key actors, the stakeholders we will be working with and we should be working with in terms of addressing child trafficking. And the private sector is one of the key actor in this. And we know that I think the experiences we are having also in the locations we are working in Kenya, we are seeing a big gap even in terms of private sector coming in and supporting in the prevention, in the awareness raising about trafficking. And as TDH and with our partners, we have been able to bring on board, especially the informal private actors. And these are basically actors in the transport the buses, probably from western to coastal area. So we have really brought a good number of private actors, especially from the transport sector, on board to ensure that they join us in the fight against the child trafficking, in terms of also how do they ensure, even through the buses, their passengers, if they see a child who doesn't look like he's with an adult, what are they supposed to do? And where and how can they report that, like an allegation or even a potential victim of trafficking? So we really work a lot, and also with the hotels industry. I think, for example, in the coastal region, where we have also a big intervention on child trafficking, especially sex trafficking. How do we also support? Because again, some of the private sector, the hotels are also not very aware about the even existence of or possibility of child trafficking with their premises. So we also try to work with them in terms of also helping them to understand the whole scenario and the whole effects on their children, as well as their businesses. So we have managed to help some put in place some codes of conducts, like just coming very strongly to say they will not even allow children in their premises, especially now those who are trafficked for sex, especially in the coastal region. It is not very easy. It is not like being a smooth sail. Of course, it's business. Some of them is business. So we also have experienced a lot of some resistance from some private sector, border associations. These are the motorcycle riders who are actually transporting children. As I said, we have observed even an emerging trend. We were really used to sex trafficking around the urban areas. Now we are seeing rural areas, children being transported from rural to urban, and as opposed to what we are used to, like the residential, the big hotels. Now we are seeing even another emerging trend of private residence and villas within the coast region, where a border would be paid. This is the motorcycle riders would be paid by some middleman or the main perpetrator to bring a particular child. And we really working with them in terms of also how do they play a role and how they influence others within that sector to see that they take part in protecting our children from trafficking. So this is something, and I would say it's work in progress. We are seeing some fruits from working, especially with the informal sectors. We haven't ventured a lot or achieved a lot working with the formal private sector, and I think this is something now going forward, even with our partners and even the NPAs. We are talking about how do we ensure private sectors formal come on board. And one key thing we are now currently working is even an NPA on child online protection, where also we are seeing like the role of private sectors, the internet services, how do they also ensure they play a part in terms of, or even in protecting children from child trafficking. So private sector is a key partner in ending human trafficking, and we are pretty aware, and the engagement is actually maybe going on well, as I can say, in Kenya, because we see a lot of them now coming on board and even being keen to support the efforts being made by several actors within the various locations. So I would also respond to the question from Dennis about the disabilities and the cross-border. Yes, we have seen, for example, in Kenya, a number of children who have disabilities being exploited or being used for labor, begging on the streets. And this is something also within the project that we are carrying out in collaboration with the Department of Children's Services, who is also very keen in terms of rescuing these children, placing them in a shelter as the whole aspect of case management and thinking through family tracing of these children. And quite a number have actually been repatriated back to their home countries, to say, because I think we've also seen some children being trafficked from other countries into Kenya and brought in the towns like Nairobi for begging on the streets. So this is something, and especially the disabilities vary. They could be mentally challenged, physically challenged. It doesn't matter what kind of disabilities, but that has been happening, and we've seen a lot of efforts by the government in terms of also establishing those linkages with their counterparts in the other countries to see how these children are supported and repatriated back and reintegrated back to their families. There was also the other question on beyond rescue, and I think also have had Juliet speak to it, because it doesn't stop at rescue. The whole case management process comes in when a child is rescued, and all the principles of case management, including the safety of the child, the best interest of these children, come at play. And once a child is rescued, I think there are many players who come on board to see that all the other services needed by this child are given. And one of them, most of these children come, they are traumatized. Maybe they have gone through a very traumatizing experience. They need PSS, psychosocial support. They need legal, they need counseling, and they even need a family tracing. Some of them are confused. They can't even tell where they come from. So it becomes a process for many actors who come in play to see how do they support and ensure finally this child has been repatriated and reintegrated within their families, including even involving their families and communities in the whole process. Thank you. I agree.
Yeah, most of the time people outside the United States of America usually don't imagine that trafficking in persons happens inside the USA. So Dr. Durgana, probably this is the time for our colleagues back home in Kenya and in Africa and probably outside the USA in general to hear about trafficking in persons inside the United States.
Yes, thank you, Agri. Actually, this is a statement that I make at almost every talk I give, and it surprises people. But we often say that every type of trafficking in the entire world can be found in the United States. And sometimes people will point to child soldiers and say that doesn't really happen in the United States. And I would say that given the time I've spent in Chicago with inner city youth gangs, that there are very similar patterns of exploitation, abuse, control, and torture. The thing is, the larger your economy is, the larger demand there is for all types of exploited goods, services, and populations. And I think it's really important to recognize that all of these issues that we're encountering, particularly now with our immigration situation at the U.S. southern border, our crisis with identification of immigration protections in conflict with asylum protections, and also ongoing high amounts of day laborers that are at heightened risk, not just of modern slavery, but also of abuse and harm from like just basic xenophobia and fear is a really huge challenge in the United States. Of course, we have the child exploitation, child sexual exploitation. We have a lot of that related to high demand areas, such as, areas in Nevada where commercial sex is celebrated and something that people go there specifically for commercial sex tourism, I would say. You also have places that really feature a lot of exploitation of children. So, for example, our Department of Health and Human Services here in the United States, this is who authorizes letters for foreign national minor victims in the United States. There have been cases of foster parents being taking those children into their own custody for, allegedly vetted, and yet those children are then found in forced labor conditions in agriculture and other places. Agriculture in our country is also incredibly exploitative and very dangerous. Pay is in conflict. Pay is not sufficient for sustaining healthy life, education. There's also lots of illness related. So tobacco farming in the United States leads to what we call green tobacco sickness. But that's when people that are harvesting the tobacco, minors included, won't have enough protection from the tobacco leaves. And when the leaves are wet, they saturate their skin with a toxin that can make them ill. I mean, these are things that are happening every day in the United States. And we have groups that have organized around this. The Coalition of Immokalee Workers does some really interesting stuff about labor organizing and labor rights. But what's very concerning is that, as I've said before, every type of slavery that I've encountered globally, we can find evidence of in the United States. And that includes, there were some questions from our fellow audience members related to forced begging and peddling. We have traveling sales crews that are almost predominantly children. And in fact, these traffickers are exploiting our national protections that identify anyone under the age of 18 as a minor, a visible minor. And they're exploiting near minors that are between 18 and 21, and basically saying, these are the people we're going to be targeting because these protections are not, these are loopholes, kind of like what Juliet was saying, that these are areas in where the legal foundation does not give them an easy mandate. Also, we have a very puritanical society. A lot of the values in the United States are sexually repressive, I would say. And so there's a lot of issue related to how participants in the commercial sex industry are perceived. So even when they're minors, even when they're clearly victims of abuse, there are still lingering perceptions in law enforcement throughout the country, and especially in rural areas that don't actually benefit from a lot of the training and other resources they have, that somehow these people, even minors, have chosen this lifestyle, that they can't be protected because they're in this situation of their own free will. And as we know, that is not true, but these are still perceptions that we challenge every day. And what's really disconcerting to me is that we, of course, have the U.S. Department of State does great work with the TIP report. We have lots of global funding that we dedicate to modern slavery. We have lots of national funding. But I'm telling you, we're still in a country where male victims, especially boys, don't have adequate shelter beds. So this is not something that is that the United States is immune to. In fact, I think we're actually we really have quite a lot of it, because we have a very diverse population that has a lot of socioeconomic inequity, right? There's a big gulf between the very wealthy and the very poor in our country, and that gulf is widening. There's less protections, there's less assistance for people. So this kind of gets to some of the questions on prevention. And of course, I think we all agree, prevention, like an ounce of prevention is worth 10 pounds of cure, right? Like there are real questions about sustained healing and the long life cycle that it will take victims to recover from their trauma. We all want that to be prevented. But as these situations become more and more fraught with socioeconomic challenges where entitlements aren't provided, education is not easily accessed, you're seeing violence within the communities that are not adequately addressed, I think you're really seeing a huge problem here. One last thing I'd mention about the United States is I've actually been an EMT, which is like a medical service provider that rides in ambulances, and a volunteer firefighter in the US since 2009. And in that capacity, I've actually found that one of the strongest strengths we have and untapped strengths we have in the United States, and I'd imagine this is the case in many other countries, is that we don't leverage our civil society actors as much as we can. And that goes beyond just NGOs like us that work on modern slavery. That works with anyone that's dealing with child protection. We have something called Big Brothers, Big Sisters. It's a mentorship program for at-risk youth. Something called National Court Appointed Special Advocates, where children who don't have legal guardians who can adequately represent their interests are then represented by people like me who come in and try to make sure that they're in the safest situation possible. But the thing is, we have communities like this in all of our countries. We have an engaged population of parents, of people that love children and honestly want to do better for them. Our faith communities are critically important in this regard. And I think it's something that we've overlooked. Like in the United States, these civil society groups fill a critical gap where law enforcement may not be able to access because they're not trusted. So our firefighters can often get into situations that law enforcement just can't. But if they know to look for certain signs of abuse and what to do, that increases the ability of our systems to respond. So I think one thing that I've learned in the United States is that no matter how much government funding you have to something, there are always gaps. And those gaps can be filled by a lot of our civil society groups, and are not even just the groups on trafficking, groups that just have a broader social interest in our communities.
So a lot of trafficking are also happening not only internally inside Kenya as well, but also internationally. And the Kenyans have had a lot of news of our colleagues who've been trafficked to the Middle East and other places like those ones. So I want to direct this question to Juliet so that we can hear some of the measures that have been put in place to address this, because so many Kenyans are concerned. And again, I also wish to hear from Dida, just after Juliet, about what he's doing at the border, because Dida works at the border between Ethiopia and Somalia. So probably we can also hear his experience with dealing with cross-border trafficking as well. Juliet.
Well, thank you, Agre. And indeed, there's a report, our own Kenyan report, the National Crime Research Center report under the Office of the Attorney General did indicate as much, that there's quite a huge number of Kenyans who are being trafficked to the Middle East. But you know what is even more interesting and sad is the fact that it's not just Kenyans who are being trafficked to the Middle East through Kenya. It's also people from Africa. So especially East Africa, we have quite a huge number of Ugandans coming through Kenya. We've been able to identify this even through our work at Love Justice, and Rwandese and Burundians who are coming through Kenya with the hope of getting to the Middle East. So what does that tell me? First, why is it that they're not traveling through their own country? Is it easier to travel through Kenya? Is it cheaper to travel through Kenya? It tells me that there's something there, especially with the employment agencies. So initially, Kenya, we had so many employment agencies. I think they were running in numbers of thousands. And then one day the government said, no more traveling to the Middle East, and said, let us now focus, let's crack the whip on these agencies. And so what the government did is that it decided that it's going to provide parameters through which the employment agencies or the recruitment agencies must meet. And that's brilliant. We went from 1,000 to about 33. Then last, I think this year, the number shot up to about 200 and something. I mean, the kind of money that they're supposed to put in as bond is outrageous. I mean, it's crazy. But you know what? The fact that this number has gone from 33 in a year to 200 and something tells me that there's a lot of money involved when it comes to recruiting of workers. The other thing the country did is it established the NEA, the National Employment Authority, and the National Employment Authority has some of the mandates include monitoring such agencies, and also training our Kenyans so that it's not just about monitoring what the agencies are doing, but also training the Kenyans so that they can know what is it that they're, when you decide to go and work in the Middle East, for instance, what it is that you're getting yourself into. And then beyond that, beyond the NEA and coming up with the laws, beyond that, there's also training that is done by the government itself to labor migrants. And also there is also identifying of fake agencies. Now, indeed, we have the official route. This is how you go to the Middle East. And then there are those briefcase agencies. This is where the problem lies. And I'll tell you for free, I agree that until we're able to crack the whip on this fake agencies, then we are running around. We're just like, I forget that animal that just keeps running around in circles without really getting anywhere. Unfortunately, this is what we are doing because for a lot of labor migrants, you will realize that, they are coming from a place of poverty. And so therefore, they don't have the necessary information that they need to be able to travel abroad. And so they will not go and pay a lot of money, for instance, to the formal ones so that they can be able to travel. So they'll go through the fake ones. And so we need to find a way. And I have had discussions with some members of NEA, and they say, you know what, that's where the problem lies for us, is being able to identify the briefcase agencies to put measures on them. So beyond what the government has done, one of the things I would actually interest the government in doing, and also NGOs within this space, is to create demand of rights by this labor migrants. We need to empower our people so much so that when they go to sign that contract, when they go to an employment agency, there are particular things they're asking of that employment agency. The NEA and the Labor and the Ministry of Labor works very well even with the migration officers, so that they're able to see when you say you're going to a certain country, you're asked, let's see your documentation, let's see the labor company or organization that has, that you signed your papers through. But this is done at a very later stage. So you're there at the migration, at the customs place or at the airport, and things can change. There are many people who are passing through there. So how about we educate our Kenyans so much, or Ugandans and Tanzanians, so that they're able to demand for their own rights. The other thing that we have done as a country is signing on to bilateral agreements with countries. So we have labor attaches in some of the countries in the Middle East. But I don't know if you also saw one of the cases that was raised, it was in the media. I don't know if it has been confirmed to be true, but of one of the consulate officers who's actually abusing the Kenyans that they're supposed to be serving. So it also tells me there's a gap. And that is why I'm saying that, yes, laws are good, policies are great. We've signed a bilateral agreement, and that is why we have a consulate in this particular country and this particular state. But beyond that, if our Kenyans or the citizens of our countries knew so much of their rights that they're able to demand for them, then some of these things would actually not be happening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Juliet. So Erastus, there is a question for you on the Q&A. So I want you to combine it with this one. So you've been receiving a lot of cases. Actually, before you go to Erastus, Dida was to add something on the question that Juliet just answered. Dida. Dida. We can't hear Dida. So Erastus, meanwhile, I know Dida when he gets back, like he said, initially he is in the border, a little bit resource, and he's having some challenges being online. So Erastus, there's a question for you on the Q&A session. So you've been receiving a lot of cases of child trafficking from the community by the responders who are responding and the community resource persons that you've been working with. So can you give us a general scenario of the process that matter has been taking through that time that you get a call until you dispense with the case? But as you answer this question, under the Q&A, there is somebody who asked you a specific question. And he said, on the point of lacking shelter for male cultural, structural, policy, etc. For some reasons, it seems we've lost both Erastus and Dida. I think they're experiencing some technical challenges there. So Madeline, for some reason, I can only see Magdalene, Doriana. Can you hear me, Magdalene? Juliet, you are back. We lost you for a moment. I think we also lost Magdalene. Yes, Magdalene is back. Good. So we've lost Dida, and I know we'll be getting back shortly. So Magdalene, I want to come back to you. You've been in the forefront working with partners in Kenya, and you have a lot of experience listening to the success stories and challenges from your partners. So what has been some of the challenges that the first responders to trafficking in person has been experiencing, especially during this time of COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Andre. And I think I heard Juliet also talk about one key challenge that first responders are experiencing. One, security-wise, because we all know that human trafficking has a very well-connected network of sometimes very key influential people within countries, and therefore it becomes a threat for people are following up on these cases. And I remember at some point one of our partners had a case where the community resource person was being threatened by anonymous calls because she was following up on a case of trafficking for a minor. And it was really a big issue and tension within the community until now. This was also brought to some law enforcers, and it was also handled at community level and resolved. So I think safety, security issues around people and social workers following up on these cases is one of the key challenges they are facing. And now, in the light of COVID-19, we all know the restrictions, there's limiting the victims or even potential victims might not find it very easy to reach out to first responders for services. And therefore, some of the cases are unreported or they are in silence because they are not able to even escape if they are with the perpetrators. Another challenge is also, of course, we talked of inadequate resources. We all know the resources are not adequate always, and you find that they really want to do this. We had the challenges of shelter. Yes, you get this victim, but you're like, where do you take this victim? Because they need rescue, they need services like psychosocial support. And also, we all know that also the whole system and social protection mechanisms have also been interrupted by COVID-19. So there is also those delays in terms of giving support to the victims who really require immediate support when they are identified by the first responders. And I think also being also at risk of even infected by COVID-19, I think it's a different. We are used to so many other emergencies. This one is a different thing altogether, and everyone is conscious on how do I reach from point A to B. So issues of even lack of the PPEs that we know are also helping practitioners and people who are providing services. Those are some of the things, and also the other aspects of now community pressure, negative social norms, as I said earlier on, communities not really supporting the work of their first responders. So these are some of the key challenges we are hearing from our partners, as much as we're also looking into how do we mitigate, how do we confront these challenges. Of course, by also working with community-based structures, and we have really seen good results working with community-based structures. These are people who are on ground, they know the issues, they know almost everyone in that community. So if there's such a case, we have also gotten support from some very influential and committed community leaders, especially thinking of even the community policing, the Nyumba Kumi leaders, religious leaders who have also been sensitized by these partners, and they are able to report and support the work we are doing with our partners. I talked about also the other angle of child empowerment and participation. I think we cannot talk about child trafficking when we are not bringing children on board and we are not hearing their voices and also getting to hear what are some of the possible solutions they think they could be supported to be able to claim their rights and also to support in terms of ensuring knowledge into this vice. And of course now the whole perception of what children can do. You know, we have children who are very, very vocal, who are raising their concerns in the open, and not really every community would appreciate this. So again, this takes a good moment of reflection, engagement deeper with communities to also appreciate and embrace the approach of child participation in addressing their issues. Yeah, so those are some of the challenges we are getting. And I'm very happy, I think for us as an organization, and just like another actor who is committed to ending child trafficking, one success case really motivates us to even work further and to work harder in terms of rescuing others and preventing children from becoming victims of child trafficking. So the few success stories really keep us on motivated and encouraged to get and move on.
So at the moment, we are being ravaged by COVID-19, and there are a lot of social distancing issues that has bring also challenges to the work that we are doing, especially on matters to do with human or child trafficking. So Magdalene, how has this impacted on your work, and how have you been making use of digital platforms including to address child trafficking with your partners?
Yeah, so we've really utilized a lot the online, the digital platforms that we have in terms of replacing the traditional methods and ways of confronting this issue. And we've really increase our engagement with the media, the TVs, the local radio stations in the communities, to create awareness and also infuse messages of COVID-19 in all our child trafficking interventions, to ensure that also people are aware of the virus, and they're also keen on protecting their children from getting infected. We've also sought a lot the voices of children through webinars. I think just the same way we are in this platform and in this session, we've also had organized children to also hear their experiences and their fears even during this COVID-19. And this we've really done very well in collaboration with our government actors, stakeholders. Department of Children's Services is very keen in terms of also supporting to bring these children together and answering to their very worries and questions that they have. Especially closed, really worried and stressed. And as much as also, we also worked with the 116, one of our partners, Childline Kenya, also to offer telecounseling, because yes, we are not able to reach all the children now because of social distances, but then through the helpline 116, we will also be able to provide psychosocial support and listen to voices of children through the helpline, which has really worked very well for us. So those are some of the new modern approaches we've adopted very quickly to ensure that, yes, with the social distancing, we are also able to reach out to the communities that we work with.
Thank you so much, Magdalene. So Erastus is back. Erastus, we lost you for a few seconds. Glad to see you again. We were asking you to tell us.
Thank you very much, Angry. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you so much, Magdalene. Erastus, we've been doing a lot of things as well. We want to hear about what you are doing currently in this era of COVID-19 pandemic to address some of these issues. But again, I also want to bring your attention to a question from Eden under the Q&A. He was asking about lacking shelter for male victims. How frequent of an occurrence is this in the context of Mark's work?
Please come again about the shelter question.
Yeah, the shelter question is from Eden. He's asking how frequent does it experience the challenge in the context of Mark's work? Lack of shelter in terms of trafficking.
Okay, I think I also lost the conversation for some time when Juliet was still speaking, some technical issues. But as I said, when we started, and again with the support of TDH, which is well represented by Magdalene today, the movement with this nature of structure of organization, we have organizations on ground on areas we've mapped as hotspots. So we have so many CSOs, NGOs, faith-based organizations, and individuals who we rally together in the fight against COVID. So what we always do in the communities largely is we do a lot of community conversations with the organized embodiment of the movement. So with this one, we can they then now report cases to us. So maybe about what after now we receive cases, it goes through the case management process because we have full-time social workers both in Nairobi and Busia where we mark these. And we also have a counselor. So through all this, then the rest of the processes, like the psychosocial support, follows in. They do needs assessment. We see whether it's counseling, medication, and legal aid. Because again, with the support of TDH, we've managed to. We have a full-time lawyer within the project that take up cases that need legal assistance. Other than that, in the shelter, they can only stay for 3 months maximum. So during that time, we do what we call home tracing and family tracing to enable both reintegration and repatriation. And once the victim is successfully united by the parents or the family, there's also that bit of empowerment to the parent. We call it parent economic empowerment. So far, that's what we do, but we have new ventures coming with the challenge of COVID. And presently, we are partnering with the Ohio University. I know the professors, and they are in the audience. We are trying to do prevention again in terms of prevention in social challenges, and also to curb the spread of COVID. So we are doing tailored communication campaigns on various platforms. We have tailored messages sending the message of prevention of COVID. Various interaction on social media, and we have Coach FM, which we are partnering with, and Marked on the ground. So that's what we've been doing presently in terms of the response to COVID, and we are hoping to do more as time goes by, also with the support both by TDH and the new partner.
Dr. Durgana, the new normal presented to us by COVID-19 is the adoption of technology in our work, just like we've heard from Magdalene also. So how can we make use of emerging technologies, including social media, to identify, counsel, advocate, and partner with others to support the victims of trafficking in persons?
Yes, thank you, Agri. So technology is kind of a double-edged sword, right? Traffickers can use it to further exploit a lot of our vulnerable populations, but we can also use it to share information and to connect with potential victims. So one of the ways that we're using technology in a really exciting way is actually satellite imagery in the deep seas. So these are often fishers that are exploited at sea for up to 7 years at a time without accessing a port and assistance. However, through satellite imaging, we can now see where those ships are and when and how long they have been stuck at sea. To that extent, we're able to determine when there's a serious risk of potential enslavement or exploitation on those ships, because if they're not returning to sea, then their crews are not returning either. We're also seeing a lot of potential in terms of labor rights organizing. So one of the things that most exploited workers in most exploited industries will say is that the right to collectively bargain and to freely organize are two things that would critically transform their ability to prevent exploitation in these industries. To that end, having free anonymous reporting lines based on smartphone applications or online is a really important way for potential workers that are facing exploitative conditions or forced labor in their jobs to then be able to report that and to receive assistance. In fact, the U.S. Department of Labor has a division called the Wage and Hour Division that has no mandate to look at immigration status when investigating claims of modern slavery and wage theft or exploitation in the United States. So a lot of people would know about that, but we can absolutely use technology to be able to do that. The last thing that I'm seeing with technology that's really exciting is a lot of national referral mechanisms. Those are hotlines. Those are all different types of outreach mechanisms that help to connect potential victims or people reporting crimes with law enforcement or NGOs or other types of assistance, including pro bono legal assistance. That's now coming online. So the United States has a National Human Trafficking Resource Center and hotline, and we actually launched a text line about 5 to 6 years ago. And so being able to reach people where they are, being able to flag instances of child pornography online and have people, the appropriate authorities, investigate it, these are all ways that technology is going to really change how we're tackling this problem.
Thank you so much. Now, as we are coming to an end to this session, I want to go to the Q&A session. So many people have been able to chat. Others have put a lot of comments under the chat section. Others have put some questions as well as comments. Let me see. We've been trying to answer some of those questions as we continue. There's a comment from Evan Munga from Ankan Regional Office. He said that lack of harmonized legal frameworks harming the fight against child trafficking, CTM. Is it child trafficking management or something? I'm not sure, CTM. He also gave a list of recommendations borrowing from the Trafficking in Persons report in terms of what the kind of measures that people need to put in place. We also have Morara. I think Morara's question has been answered. He said, in regard to first responders on child trafficking, are we doing enough to prevent child trafficking as opposed to responding to the vice? For example, expanding educational opportunities, economic empowerment of low-income households to address the push factors of child trafficking. So I just want to give each of the panelists, as we round off, to give us some closing remarks, anything that you wish the audience to know based on the questions that they've asked under the Q&A session, and also anything that probably you want to put across as you finish. So we'll start with Magdalene, then Juliet.
Thank you very much, Andre. I hope I'm audible enough. I realized my internet is not very stable. But I think to us as a PDH, we are very keen on systemic change in all our interventions, just to ensure that the sustainability of our interventions are key and are achieved. And for looking at the 5 Ps in terms of addressing child trafficking, we really urge, I think, all stakeholders, because again, this is not a one-man show in ending trafficking, especially of children who are the most vulnerable. We really keen on the collaboration and the partnership, and that's why we map out our stakeholders, and we are like, who can do what and when, and how do we work together to ensure that all our efforts are really concerted and we achieve a sustainable change for children in the country. And we really, as an organization, also in the several coalitions, the newest, I think, is Joining Forces Alliance, where we have the agencies, Save the Children Plan, International Child Fund, SOS, has, and then they're coming together to see how do we work together, because we see also so many joint efforts from organizations, and we're really keen to like working together, not really in silos, to ensure that we really get a sustainable change for our children, regardless on any thematic area each organization is working towards. So I think for us, we're really keen on that. And having said that, partnership being a key approach for us, basically working with very, very local partners who are very keen and who are on the ground and who know the local knowledge, who know the possible solution the communities can come up with to ensure that we really have achieve a sustainable and inclusive change for children in Kenya. It's very, very helpful, a very good engagement and discussion, and we look forward to further engagement. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Agri, and Marked and Ohio University for having us be part of this wonderful webinar. I have learned quite a lot, and I just want to say, what you've asked, what is that I'd like the audience to know first, is that in Kenya, we have TOCU, the Transnational Organized Crime Unit within the DCI, and we also have the Anti-Human Trafficking Child Protection Unit within the DCI. So in the event that a case happens and you're not confident that, that the local police officer within your area will be able to handle this matter, please do reach out to them and report these cases, because it is necessary that we do, and we have these offices for this particular reason. Because today we are focusing on the frontline workers, I just want to say thank you to all our frontline workers. It's a difficult job every day, putting your life at risk and putting the lives of your family members at risk. So thank you very much. I would also like to urge all partners, NGOs, government, to start thinking about psychosocial support to our frontline workers. The truth of the matter is, very few people think about the effect of psychosocial effects that this work has on, for instance, police officers. I think it is really necessary that all our NGOs and all our partners come together and start thinking towards that. And not just police officers, but anybody who, works as a frontline worker. The other thing I would like to make a call to is decriminalization of the victims of trafficking. We really have to do something about it. They're not criminals. They're just, it's like me being, criminalized for trying to run away from, enslavement. So it is really time to focus. Globally, it's a call I'm making 20 years on after the Palermo Protocol became a law. I think it is necessary to start thinking of decriminalizing victims of trafficking. And finally, it's time to keep our eyes open, especially as the border opens in Kenya. As our border opens, there's going to be an influx. There's going to be very many numbers of persons who are susceptible to trafficking. And remember that this has now changed. They'll not look the same. They'll look different. And the traffickers will use different mechanisms. So my call to all my colleagues and people we work with is to wear maybe different hats, to think differently, so that you can actually stop human trafficking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juliet. Dr. Durgana.
Sure. Well, thank you. It's been such a pleasure to be joined by my panelists here today to have these really insightful questions. Again, I would just say that I'll send out the information right now for Statistics Without Borders. And if anyone on this call or anyone needs any pro bono data assistance, I am more than happy to make sure that you get the help that you need. So I'll send that through right now. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Erastus.
Maybe I start by responding to Eden. I think it slipped me about the problem with shelter. So these are a nationwide problem, and I think all the CSOs are cracking their minds to see a solution to it. It's a big problem, and I think moving forward, maybe we'll get a solution with that. Otherwise, I'm grateful for this opportunity also, especially those who are really associated with MAC in terms of support. We are still a young organization, but raring to grow. And I'm really proud to be associated with the creme de la creme in this fight against human trafficking on the same day of marking such a World Day. So maybe just wrap up. I'll thank the people who turned up. I'll thank Juliet so much, Juliet Ruth. That was very informative. Dr. Davina, that was wonderful. And thank you very much, Madeline. We really look up to you. You are making, actually. Mark is coming up courtesy of TDH. Lastly, the Ohio fraternity, starting by Agre, the PhD student. We wish you all the best, especially in your studies. I know you're finishing soon. I know there's Dr. Smaka in the audience. I know Professor Howard may be in the audience. I thank you guys so much for the support and direction and guidance. And I can give you a word from the movement, because it is a collection of so much. There's a collection of so much people within it, organizations and individual volunteers, professional and all that, in terms of ideas and resources. We are giving you a word that will never disappoint in any initiative we take up together. Allow me also to mention a few who tuned in, like Eden Ekono. Kama is in the UK. We have is a very difficult name. There's Agnes, somebody, Akasapeto from Burkina Faso. She's in the audience. We thank you guys very much, and we appreciate your association with the movement. Thank you very much from my heart. I was going to forget about Dida. There's a lot of technical issues at the northern end of Kenya. He left prematurely. He is asked to send this. Thank you very much.
Good. I want to give a special shout out to Mtoto News. They volunteered to live stream our panel discussion online. So that has been really great because of their support. I know part of the audience, some of them have been emailing me after we put this thing up. And I realized that a number of us were from different time zones.